Okay, we're just gonna look a little Snow White today, and that's fine. Mood, witch. Heckin' mood. My name is Kiri Callaghan, and today we're gonna talk about why this conversation is not one to rejoice about. Welcome back, Kindred. I've been gone and moving, and I'm technically still somewhat in the throes and not fully unpacked, and technically I have a walkthrough on Friday evening, so we're still not in the final stretch. We're in the final stretch, we're just not in the clear yet. Anyway, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about episode 87 and 88. I know a lot of people are really rooting for Hades and Persephone to get together right this second. I do get that. One of my favorite shows is Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, and I cannot tell you how many times I have screamed, "Now kiss!" at the screen. 'Cause gosh dang it, man, the sexual tension you can just cut with a knife. But trust me, you don't want it to start like this. It's also good at this point to sort of figure out where we are, to look at story structure in general, and look at the many plot lines that have lined up thus far that are nowhere near a conclusion. For instance, in story structure, you have A plots, B plots, C plots, etc. The A plot in this instance, because this is a romance, is Hades and Persephone. And the A plot almost always resolves last, because it's really the plot you're there for. So all of these B, C, D, E, F, blah, 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 blah plots that are still very far from being resolved, yeah, that makes me very nervous for this seemingly happy moment. By classical standards, if it's a tragedy, it ends in a death. If it's a comedy, it ends in a wedding. We already know in the original myth, essentially, Persephone and Hades end in a wedding. So even ignoring the fact that we've got all these little subplots that are giant threads that need to eventually be resolved, there's no way we're getting to a wedding anytime soon. Persephone and Hades, in the long grand scheme of things, have really just met. Like, I know we are in almost episode 90, but when you look at the actual timeline, very little time has actually passed. Heck, we haven't even had an introduction of Demeter beyond flashbacks, and even canonically, she's a huge obstacle to this romance. Which means this is not the happy ending you're looking for. This has a lot of problems, and is going to have, as a result, some not great consequences. Now I know, why is the conversation in 87 and 88 so problematic? Well, do you remember how we talked about if you don't deal with your toxic behavior in one relationship, you'll march it into the next? First, I want to start with what went right in this conversation. And the short answer is episode 87. The long answer, a statement of fact was made. Persephone was angry. She then clarified, because as we've talked about before, anger is a secondary emotion, often to defend something more vulnerable, like being hurt or sad. She was upset. She confirmed she was upset with Hades, and I would love to highlight that though she was firm and did not waver on that fact, she was also not aggressive. She was open and honest about her feelings. This was such a beautiful moment of, yes, communication is wonderful! Because you can be open and honest with someone about how they hurt you without attacking them. However, something I do want to point out is, it is kind of putting someone in a slightly awkward position when they have expressed that they are upset with you, to then immediately shower them with hospitality. This is often a sign of past trauma. Hades has dealt with Minthe's anger in the past, and he's used to trying to placate this abusive temper before he gets burned by it. And because of that, subconsciously, he's applying those same tactics to Persephone. He's getting her water, he's made her a dress, he has lunch prepared already. This idea that this is usually how Minthe is handled is sort of hit home more by looking at that dress, because honestly, it looks like something out of Minthe's closet. It's even the color we most often see her wearing. Oxblood, love it. it so much, though. This is one of the ways that defense mechanisms we learned from bad relationships can create harmful trends in new relationships that we're trying to be healthy about. It removes equal footing in the conversation. This space literally belongs to Hades. He created it in a void, I guess? It's like Janet's void from The Good Place. I'm not sure. And while she may feel safe with him, I just want to point out, so it's not forgotten, that it is important to note this space is not neutral ground, and Persephone has no familiarity with it. So it does put her at a slight off-kilterness. While I do not believe discussions like this should be thought of something that could be won or lost, this does give Hades a sort of home team advantage rather than an equal playing field. His actions may be coming from a place of kindness, but as it's likely coming from the experience of having to deter explosive anger, what it can do here is make someone feel guilty for expressing a legitimate grievance. When you shower someone with this much hospitality after they've expressed needing to talk to you about a grievance with you, including offering her a gift, that person can feel indebted to you, and they may end up censoring themselves out of guilt because they feel ungrateful. I'm not saying that's what's happening now, but I do think it's important to keep in your mind that this is a part of our psychology and could very well be affecting her. She does not look super comfortable through most of this entire comic. She goes back and forth between being very nervous and very amorous, and then being very nervous about the fact that she wants to be amorous. And when he offers her the gift of having the dress made for her for real, he admits he's avoiding the subject. But then he provides her with lunch, which, while still needed, you can tell from Persephone's expression that even she thinks he's trying to butter her up rather than talk about it. When she states her issue, you see his confidence briefly return to the point he's just casually chewing on his steak when she's asking about what he did. He does not ask why this offended her. He does not ask what he should have done instead. He simply states that he doesn't see what's wrong and that a lesson had to be taught, in a manner that sort of reads like he thinks he's teaching her one now. Why this is important is it's highlighting the issue that these two do not see each other as equals yet. I'm gonna take a little detour that's gonna seem odd at first, but stick with me because it is relevant. I'm not saying Hades is mansplaining something to her, but there's very similar layers. Please bear with me on this. Let's say you're pretty young, but you've been a baker for most of your life. You know how to make the most complicated pastries and breads, etc., etc. And then someone who's admittedly been a baker much longer than you explains in a conversation how to preheat an oven. They are trying to be helpful. The intent is good, but then you have to ask a question: why do they think this is helpful to you? It's because that person does not think you know how to preheat an oven. This person thinks they are helping you by explaining to you what they assume you do not know. Why this gets frustrating in our daily life is when you peel back those basic layers, the underlying fact is this person does not think you know the basics of working an oven, even though you're also a baker. And the subtext is that person thinks that you are incompetent or naive. They may not realize it, but if they ask themselves those same questions. Now, why is this relevant? Because what we're seeing right now is a woman's autonomy and protection being explained to her by someone who is not her, that she did not ask an opinion from, that is definitely not her parent. Hades thought a lesson needed to be taught to this reporter. He wanted to be helpful and stand up for her. This is good. But then you have to ask yourself, why does he think this would be helpful? Because Hades does not think she can do it for herself, or that she will do it for herself. Why? Because ultimately, even if he won't admit it out loud, Hades thinks she's naive and needs to be protected. And rather than asking if she would like his help finding the tools to do these things for herself, he did them for her. This will ultimately change, I am absolutely certain. But this power imbalance is important because it's one of many reasons why they are not ready for their happily ever after yet. Now Persephone challenges his statement, "You heckin' go, girl," and flatly lays out why he actually did what he did. And in fact, it had very little to do with her or her benefit, to which Hades concedes. Props to him for admitting that. That's not an easy step. I genuinely am very happy for him for doing that. She brings up the damage it did, and unfortunately, because she's clearly trying to avoid admitting whatever the heck act of wrath she once did that I'm guessing is responsible for all those souls going, wah, we end up skirting a bit around the important part of an apology. So as the result of that, I'm not the most confident in his apology. Because he's apologizing because he didn't mean to hurt her, which is not really an apology. It's acknowledging you did hurt someone, and that is good, because you do have to acknowledge you hurt someone before you can make amends. But it's not taking responsibility for how you hurt them or the damage it did. And it's also not explaining how you're going to avoid hurting her in a similar way by talking to her in the future. I mean, she says, please talk to me, but there's really no acknowledgement of her saying that. And maybe it did sink in, but what follows makes me think probably not. It's not about a problem right now. It's about what it could become. Because without all of those steps, you aren't really apologizing for what you did. Most of the time, when people around us hurt us, it's actually not malicious, so of course they never wanted to hurt us. It's sort of a very redundant statement to make. But if we don't acknowledge what went wrong, and how it went wrong, and what we'll do to avoid doing it in the future, we're likely going to end up repeating it. I go into a lot more detail about the anatomy of an apology in my How to Apologize video, which there should be a little thing you can click on right now in order to watch it if you'd like. I highly recommend it, totally not biased. In regards to that apology, it's likely this apology is the same both he and Minthy made back and forth in their toxic relationship, where they apologize for hurting each other, but they don't actually take responsibility or make plans of action in order to prevent it from happening again. So they get caught in this awful cycle of hurting each other, apologizing, making up, or guilting, or whatnot. Brief period of peace, hurting each other, apologizing. It's just gross. So again, this is a potential aspect of something toxic in a past relationship. Well, it's not past yet, actually. In his bad toxic relationship, marching itself into a new relationship, platonic or otherwise. And this brings us to episode 88. That's the good stuff. Sweetness.
Excuse me?
Grabbing her hands and resting his chin on them, that freaking smile as he rubs her hands while she admits that this is making things harder.
What's all this, please?
I'll tell you what it is, Mr. Izzard. It's a heckin' HR violation if I've ever seen one, for starters. Hades. I do not care that you are friends. She is a very young intern. You are her boss and superior in every way in the underworld. This is crossing a very clear and established workplace boundary. Hats off to Persephone, who is trying to genuinely apologize. Because she's right. When you flirt with someone knowing they are in an exclusive relationship, regardless of your opinion of what that relationship is, it's disrespectful to that person, their partner, and your relationship with that friend. But instead of listening, Hades is all like, bedroom eyes, and pulling her closer to the point where she has to pull her hands away and insist he let her finish. That sounds dirty. Was not intended to. Look, God or not, at 19, at literally I have only had 19 years on this planet, your first encounter with strong emotions is overwhelming. She talks about her scholarship, not expecting this kind of interaction, not expecting a strong connection with someone like this. So I don't blame her for asking this question. Because at 19, you do need that sanity check. Heck, at 2000, you need that sanity check. But it's asking for a sanity check after saying she wasn't respecting a boundary. And her apology is also not complete. She apologized, she acknowledged the damage, and then she didn't really talk about how she'd like to rebuild that boundary. Instead, both of them continue to blur it. And I know, Minthy and Hades are bad together. I'm not defending them. Even before she physically struck him, it was an abusive and toxic relationship. But remember that first video I made where I talked about how Hades was also contributing in admittedly far more subtle ways to the toxicity of that relationship, and how part of that was a complete and absolute disregard for Minthy's boundaries? He has told Hecate that he wasn't sure what to do about Minthy after the falling out. Right after Minthy slapped him, Hades told Hera not to hate Minthy, and I quote, "Because I love her and you should respect my wishes." Hades, you cannot ask people to respect what you blatantly do not respect yourself. Persephone, girl, I have been that dumb 20-year-old girl whose brain knew she needed to GTFO, but her heart was so overwhelmed with new emotions, it felt justified in staying. But it's not justified, and you need to walk away if you cannot make that boundary. You need to put action to your words, rather than saying you need to respect their relationship and then continue to cuddle and flirt with that man in the relationship. Doesn't matter if he's flirting back. Actually, it's worse if he's flirting back, because then it shows he doesn't respect his current partner either. Like, Persephone, there are giant red flags of why you do not want to date this man right now. And I'm sorry, Hades, but I hold you, the 2,000-year-old king of the underworld, more responsible than the confused 19-year-old trying to suss out her emotions for the first time and doing her best to distance herself and failing partly because you keep pulling her back in. Look at how many times she pulls her hands away and he takes them again. Go back and look at how many times her boundaries are disregarded. Look at the fact that she brings up her scholarship and how that it would not be okay with her having an intense hand-holding session with the king of the underworld, and how it only takes a matter of minutes before he takes her hands again. Look at how many times she brings up Minthy, and the only time he acknowledges Minthy is when Persephone has to spell out, no one deserves to be cheated on. Hades has consistently shown, even in flashbacks, that he does not respect the woman he was going to propose to, which was against her wishes, which is another example of how he kind of disregarded her boundaries. The only time we've really seen him stick up for her was that last talk with Hera. Prior to that, he's let Hera call her trash consistently, without argument. Beware of anyone in this situation who's not acknowledging the fact that you're apologizing for disrespecting their relationship, because it's also them disrespecting their partner, and also you. This is consistently putting Persephone in a position where she will be pitted against Minthy. It's kind of casting her unwillingly as the other woman, rather than acknowledging, you're right, this is not okay, even if I have feelings for you, I need to deal with this first. And acknowledge that, rather than just not mention it at all. So while I do believe the romantic relationship between Minthy and Hades should not be saved, Hades does need to fix himself, or he's going to continue a lot of those toxic behaviors, even more so with Persephone. Heck, a huge example of him disrespecting Persephone and not seeing her as an equal, Hades even delights in the fact that he's getting away with paying her a salary even though he shouldn't, rather than telling her about it. He has a chance to come clean, and he doesn't. This is not the action of an equal partner. And this is not the action of someone who respects you. This is not the relationship you are rooting for. Both parties have a lot of growing up to do, which is why we keep reading. This is the start, and these are the problems and the flaws of what these characters will need to work through and overcome to bring us to that satisfying conclusion. Again, I want to draw attention to the fact that we know Hades and Persephone are going to end up together. And because of that, our brains sort of gloss over these character flaws and problematic situations because we're rooting for that happy ending. But this is not that happy ending. And if this were our actual life, we don't actually know we'll end up with that person. We like to think we do. We tell ourselves it's fate or destiny or whatever we can conjure up to justify our morally questionable actions. But if you actually find yourself in this situation, step back, I beg you, as far back as you need to stop yourself from falling into that trap. Do right by yourself, your current partner, and whatever partner you hope to have in the future. By not taking that step back, you're disrespecting yourself, your relationships, and all parties involved. And ultimately, you are setting yourself up for failure, no matter what some of those parties have done. One bad does not justify more bad. We fool ourselves into thinking that there has to be perfect victims. Everyone makes terrible mistakes. Some people are really not great people, but that doesn't mean they deserve you being cruel or treating them like they're not a person. Because again, that's just repeating a cycle of abuse. But those are my thoughts. What are yours? Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with all your amazing Lore Olympus loving friends. Keep on the windy side of care, kindred, and until next time, stay curious.